Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us for this interfaith panel to hear from Dr. Mehnaz Afridi and Rabbi Dr. Shmuly Yanklowitz about democracy and tolerance in each of their respective faiths. And before I get started, I wanted to give you all a heads up due to the sensitivity of the issues. Your questions will go directly to me, that anything you write in the chat will come to me and we'll discuss them out loud after. Now to introduce Dr. Mehnaz, she's a professor of religious studies and director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University. She teaches courses on Islam, the Holocaust, genocide, comparative religion, and feminism. Her last book, Shoah Through Muslim Eyes, was nominated for the Yad Vashem International Book Prize for Holocaust Research and the Jacob Schnitzer Book Award. She's currently working on a book, The Wounded Muslim, and a co-edited book on global approaches to the Holocaust. In 2019, she was awarded the Costello Award for teaching excellence in the School of Liberal Arts and the Lasallian educator at Manhattan College. She's also a U.S. State Department member on the delegation for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. She also serves as a member of the Committee of Ethics, Religion, and the Holocaust at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. Dr. Afridi obtained her PhD from the University of South Africa and her MA and BA from Syracuse University. Dr. Afridi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, we're very excited about it. And Rabbi Shmuly, many of you guys know him. He's a teacher, an activist. It's plenty of amazing things. And Dr. Afridi, we'll get going with you for the first question. What does your faith have to say about supporting democracy?
Great question. But before that, I just want to say how honored I am to be with Rabbi Shmuly. He and I met through a Uyghur conference that we did in April. And he's this amazing, dynamic, energetic, activist, charitable man. And I watch everything he does and he amazes me. So I'm really honored. And Isaac, thank you so much for putting this together. You've been so wonderful and sweet and kind about everything. So I really appreciate it. So let me begin with Islam and democracy. So one of the ways that when I teach religious studies, I talk about, especially in my 100 level courses, we do like a survey of world religions, and I teach Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And when I talk about, like, say, like you were taking core messages from Islam, I talk about egalitarianism, and I think that is such a cornerstone of the Islamic faith, but also the Muslim story in terms of Prophet Muhammad starting to build his community in Mecca and also Medina, where he wanted to get rid of slavery. He wanted to give women more entitlement and power in terms of rights. And he also was very firm in believing that any race or any background was able to become a full Muslim. And Bilal was the first man to give the call of prayer in Mecca. And he was a Black man who was enslaved. And the story goes is that Prophet Muhammad freed him, and he thought he was going to be working for Prophet Muhammad. And he said, no, you are completely free. And that had never happened. So one of the ways that I think of democracy is through that lens of social justice in Islam. I know we don't hear it very often. We hear the extremism, we hear all of the violence that people quote from the Quran, which we do talk about in my classes, in my lectures, and these are problematic things. I mean, we have that in Judaism, in Christianity, and Islam. But democracy was a cornerstone for Muslims very early on. And women had the right to own property. Women were given the right to divorce. Women were given the right to marry. All of these rights were all about how we live in an equitable society, like we're hoping United States, right? And other democracies that we talk about. So one of the perceptions people have of Islam is that Islam is somehow incompatible with democracy. Yet it's not. It's actually the opposite. And you've seen books and pundits talk about this over and over again, which becomes really problematic for Muslims to negotiate who they are, even in the United States today.
Thank you so much for that answer, Dr. Afridi. Now on to you, about Shmuly. What does your faith have to say about supporting democracy? Just to repeat the question.
Thanks for the question, Isaac. And I just want to share how honored I am to be here with Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. She is just a wonderfully inspiring scholar, a nuanced thinker. She's been an incredible ally to the Jewish community and other communities. And she represents the best of academia, the best of allyship, and is just an incredibly kind person and thoughtful person. So I'm very honored to be partnering with her. And as she mentioned, we partnered in this Uyghur genocide conference, and I learned so much from her. And I hope that that's actually a great example of how we can unite to combat hate in the world on the highest level, global and domestic arenas. So I'm so happy we're here at this crucial time, a week before the election, to think about how we can come closer together. In terms of Judaism and democracy, I mean, like Dr. Afridi, I could speak for hours about this, but I'll just say 2 or 3 minutes about it. I would start with saying, literally the parsha, the Torah portion we read last week, that all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, indicates that every human being, not based on wealth or gender or power, has infinite worth. And that means every person matters and their voice matters. And starting from there is the basis of human rights and the notion that everyone's voice ultimately matters. I would also suggest that in the rabbinic tradition, there's a sense that capital T truth is put to the side for peace. This comes up time and again, most famously in a midrash, a rabbinic teaching that God casts truth down and says the world can't be sustained on perfect truth. So why do I mention that? Because we could imagine a government system that we say, you know what, let's just make it the most true and just system based on, one person or a small group's, understanding. But for the sake of peace, we have a sense that bringing more voices in is what's going to sustain the health of a nonviolent system. Not just that, but that also there's a truth in that. Now, of course, the problem in democracy is that there still can be minorities left out. When you lose an election, oftentimes your agenda loses, and sometimes your communal interests lose. And who loses most are the most marginalized at times. Now, the ancient Near Eastern religions, they, like the Torah, cared about the widow and the orphan. They cared about the most vulnerable. But what they didn't care about in those ancient Near Eastern religions, pre-Bible, was the ger, the stranger. And in the Torah, it says love God one time. It says love your fellow Jew one time. But it says love that stranger 2 times. And that was a major insight at that time, that what democracy has to be about, not in addition to our core communal interests, is making sure the most alienated are accounted for ultimately. And so I hope that whoever wins the various elections and propositions on local, state, federal levels, that we can continue to support and defend the democratic infrastructure that sustains this whole project.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And I always appreciate when you shine light on our need to care for the marginalized and to do our best to look out for them. So now on to the next question. Back to you, Dr. Afridi. What does your faith have to say about tolerance and pluralism?
Oh, she needs to be unmuted. It seems that she was somehow muted.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I couldn't get myself to unmute, so I asked Emma. Okay. Yeah, tolerance and pluralism. I mean, I'm going to take from what Rabbi Shmuly said. In the Quran, one of my favorite verses is Quran verses 548, which is basically saying that God has created differences, different nations and tribes and faces and religions, right? In order for us to have the challenge to get to know each other. So difference is actually in the sacred text. Prophet Muhammad's life was about meeting with Jews and Christians and others that were in the midst of Mecca and Medina. There were stories about even Zoroastrians in the Quran, right? Because we're talking about Sassanian Empire before the Persian Empire. So there's all kinds of kind of diverse ways of seeing this. And it's really important that we understand that Islam does come with this idea of pluralism. And it is plural, just like Judaism, right? So you have Muslims in Africa, you have Muslims in Asia. Those are the highest population of Muslims. Arabs are 20% of the 1.9 billion Muslims. So we always sort of even racialize, right, this kind of homogeneous group in the world. I am from Pakistan. I was born there. I'm an Asian Muslim, but most people wouldn't think that. So there's a lot of this diversity that goes on that we tend to forget. I mean, I'm teaching right now a class where I'm talking about North Africa and Jewish Arab and Muslim Arab relations, right? So, and my students are like, what? There are Arab Jews? I mean, they don't really know, right? So these are the ways, and when you look at the trajectory of how Prophet Muhammad moved around and how these empires sort of multiplied all over the world, you start to see that there was always difference to begin with. So I think this idea of pluralism is perhaps a new idea for us after the ideologies of fascism, Nazism, communism. We have this misnomer that religion is the most violent ideology. However, I would argue, as both a genocide scholar and an Islamic scholar, that secular ideologies have killed and engulfed more people. And so when we're thinking about religion and pluralism, they are actually aligned. They're part of the same breath. And when you think about how God is mentioned in the Quran, and very much like Rabbi Shmuly said, that God created a man and a woman together and has created absolutely everything that we can ever imagine in this universe. But we are so humbled by the Quran that we can never know exactly that huge universe, right? To even understand what God's intent is, right, is impossible. And I really, really love post-Holocaust theology because I've asked those questions myself, and I'm working with those questions in the Islamic context now in my new work.
Thank you so much for the thoughtful answer, Dr. Afridi. Now back to you, Rabbi Shmuly.
Yeah, thank you, and Dr. Afridi. Actually, one thing I'm thinking about since an op-ed 2 weeks ago is, are we post-Holocaust era now? Is this now a new era post-Holocaust? Given a number of rapidly changing realities. So in any case, to the question of tolerance and pluralism, post-Enlightenment, when we enter the era of skepticism, there's two different ends of the pole. One end is kind of hard relativism. The other is pluralism. And we can't return back to that fundamentalism. But in the relativism, it says basically everything is lacking truth. But in the pluralism, it says everything has some truth. And I much more pull towards the latter. Now, in embracing that pluralism, that is to say that we still live with our absolutes. We just make more space for others' absolutes as well. And we're willing to critique and hold those absolutes a little bit more loosely. Like Dr. Afridi, I would also root my pluralism in the Hebrew word anivut, or humility. It used to be that the most religious person was the one who lived with mystery and wonder and uncertainty. And in many ways, what's taken hold is that to be a religious person is you're the most certain. You're the most certain and the most committed to the absolute truth. And I would love to return to the type of humility of wonder and not knowing of God's expansiveness being so great that we can't even imagine knowing. And that makes more space for others. It makes more space for others when we bracket that total certainty. And I would say, given that we're a week from elections, even though I'm robustly involved, I think the pluralism should extend beyond religion into the political realm. That's not to say, again, some kind of relativism that it's all just, it's all just corrupt and out the door. It really matters for people's lives, but actually to figure out the most noble parts of liberal ideology and conservative ideology and the like, rather than just pointing out the worst of it all, and trying to figure out how to build bridges along these ideological divides as well. Jonathan Haidt's work around how personality types bring out different virtues and political commitments is worth considering. And if we can get out of this really stuck spot where only where I stand is the correct spot, I think we can cultivate that tolerance and pluralism more. And the last thing I just want to say here is that in addition to whatever results we want in the election, and I hope we all do have major aims and goals of what we want our country and world to look like. I also hope that we can come out whole together in that and reduce violence, reduce division, even when there's real divides. And I think that's one of the roles religions can play is lowering the temperature a little bit. Even while we advocate for what we think is most important, figure out how to lower the vitriol.
Can I just say one thing? I just want to remind everyone that if you give someone rights, or if you vote for a right, it's not going to take anything away from you. And there is this kind of perception we have that if we give women equal rights, or if we give minorities equal rights, that somehow all the men will lose something. No, it doesn't work that way. That isn't how even the political system doesn't work. So when you want to think about rights, whether it's about gender, whether it's about race, whether it's about religion, we are not going to lose anything if we give pluralism a chance and we can coexist that way. I just wanted to add that.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think this is another role where we can offer spiritual tools, because we live in a society of fear right now. And with this much fear, we inevitably move towards a scarcity mentality. I don't have enough and someone else is getting ahead and I'm not. And that scarcity mentality, it enables us to be afraid, and that fear channels to hate. And that hate can lead to dehumanization, and dehumanization can lead to brutalities. And so for us to be able to somehow cultivate an elevated spiritual consciousness that we're all in this together, right? Muslims and Jews and Christians and other faiths and no faith, that we're all on this planet together. And we have to, and the tensions are real, but we have to figure out how to experience that human solidarity again.
I think those are some great points. So thank you for the additions there. Now, back to you, Dr. Afridi. How have you experienced the situation post October 7th and within this war? And how have the elections impacted this as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's horrible, okay? It's horrible, it's painful, it's traumatic. I can't even see the news at times because it's so painful. Partnerships have broken up after October 7th, Jewish Muslim partnerships. But you know what? I'm here because I want to solve this. And I want to be part of the peace, which is actually very courageous today. And I know that sounds weird, but peace is very courageous today. And it's courageous because people don't believe in it. We have become sort of, oh no, we don't want peace. And if we don't do peace, meaning during this time, right? What was it? What is it? Oh yeah. If not now, when was Primo Levi's book, right? I have to stand up for humanity. I have to stand up for my Jewish brothers and sisters, for my Muslim brothers and sisters who are in deep pain and who are suffering, and my Jewish brothers and sisters who are also in shock, right? And the one thing I want to say about October 7th is that I do not represent Hamas, and not all Palestinians represent Hamas, and not all Jews represent the killing of children. And I want to say this, it might seem obvious, but may not, that no Jew wants to kill a Palestinian and no Palestinian wants to kill a Jew, generally, right? Now we have killing going on. And that's very, very painful. But at the same time, we have to come to the table as faith leaders, especially. We have to take that risk in the spiritual direction that God is perhaps asking us to do right now, this right moment. I may be criticized by many Muslims in the world today, but I know that Islam calls for peace. So I don't have a way out. This is my journey. And I when I do my salat, I say to God every single day, God, guide me in the right path. And I wake up again and I do it again. So that's what I'm trying. This is how it's been for October 7th. And we need to step up and we need to start this conversation, at least as painful as it is, because we have to acknowledge what happened on October 7th, the pain. We have to acknowledge the hostages are still not free. We have to acknowledge the deaths of thousands of Palestinians that are innocent. And then we can have a conversation. But if we don't make that acknowledgement, we can't have this dialogue. And if you're willing to have this dialogue, you have to risk your own pain and suffering and listen to the suffering of the other, because their suffering is not less or more than yours. It's just their suffering. Your suffering is not less or more than theirs. And so this is a very important time for all of us, Jews and Muslims, to have these conversations. Sorry, I got very passionate there.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's so well said. It's so well said. And I just want to second that it's just all horrible. As you opened up, it's just all horrible. It's a very tragic and upsetting place to be in. I can't speak for how the Muslim community at all is experiencing, but in the Jewish community, in my lifetime, I've never experienced anything like this, anything even close to this. The amount of lost allyship that Jews have experienced where they thought they had allies in the US, the amount of, as you said, Muslim Jewish partnerships, I was involved, that kind of that dissolved. And I think you're right. We have to start by just acknowledging all of it, being able to name all of the pain and not hiding from that. And, again, in this famous Torah portion of this last week, one of the famous questions there is in the first killing in the history of the world, as this narrative tells it, the question, am I my brother's keeper? And I think we have to start with a resounding yes, that we are responsible for humanity's welfare, for our own community, however we define our community, and at large. And wherever we fall on foreign policy and what should be done, and the war, and there's so much to say there and unpack it, and maybe we'll go there. That we have to start with the simple answer that yes, I see the pain of all the people, and I am my brother's keeper. And the elections have made it so much worse. It's made it so much worse. Muslims and Jews often used as pawns in political games, and just raising the temperature hotter and hotter, to the point where it's hard to know who to believe, what's just about winning votes and what's actually about peace and about security. And it's really tense times. It's also really hard that there's many communities where for Muslims and for Jews, where they feel they have to give up dozens of other values and moral commitments they have, because they feel their community is so at threat, right? And we keep seeing this, how Muslims are voting and how Jews are voting, who normally might have a whole range of interests, who feel their community is so at threat. Maybe Jews feel the main threat is Iran, or the main threat is Hamas, or Hezbollah, or Houthis, or whatever, or the Squad, or white nationalists, whoever they feel are the major threat. that they feel like that's the main thing they have to hunker down and defend from. And the same for Muslims who might normally have said, oh, I'm going to support Harris, but I really need to support Trump because of this and that in the war. And the elections are changing our communities and their moral priorities in many ways. And it's going to take us a while to unpack that. The last thing I want to say just is that there was a 20th century post-Holocaust rabbi who once said that there's only one thing that we can pray for that only works if we pray for all of us. Because I can be rich and you can be poor, and I can be happy and you can be sad. I can be strong and you can be weak, right? There's many things I can pray for me to get and not the other to get, as you said earlier around scarcity, right? But there's only one thing that we can pray for that only works if it's for all of us, and that's peace, right? Peace, it only works when it's a prayer that is about all of us. No one has peace if someone else doesn't have it. That's just how the world works. And it's such a holy commitment. In Judaism, peace is shalom is a name of God. It's a name of God. That's how sacred the concept is, beyond just nonviolence, a true harmony in the world.
Thank you, Rabbi. And I just wanted to mention again for anybody that missed the announcement at the beginning that any questions you have, there's no general chat. You can message me and I will bring them up at the end. And now to our next question. Dr. Afridi, how do you deal with Islamophobia in America? And then for Rabbi Shmuly, how do you deal with anti-Semitism?
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to point out that it's interesting how Jews and Muslims are such a small minority of the United States, right? It's 3% Jewish in America, and it's less than 1% of Muslims. Yet you would think we had taken over the whole country, the two groups, right? Because of the Middle East, or the way that we are, as Rabbi Shmuly said, used as pawns for political gains, used for all kinds of ways to deal with the elections, but also for a long time, right? The history of Islamophobia comes from really Europe and the colonial mentality, right? These people, the Orientals, the Arabs, they're backward. They don't know what democracy is. They don't know how to eat. They worship some guy called Muhammad, right? But all of those tropes came from Christians, the Christian world, right? And then you have in America this idea of pushing back on any religion that came in, and Jews, right? Jews experienced a lot of anti-Semitism right away when they immigrated to the United States. But I think what we need to understand is that we both share a history of this in the United States as minority religions, and we're still sharing that. Anti-Semitism has increased by 338% since October 7th. Islamophobia has increased by 284%, so pretty much equal, right? And the people who are doing this hatred are not Jews and Muslims. We forget that a lot of these hate crimes, violent hate crimes, are coming from non-Jews and non-Muslims. Sometimes from the far-right Christian groups, sometimes from people who are just ignorant and don't understand what the issues are at hand. And a lot of the times they come from people who just hate Jews or Muslims. The immigration we went through so many problems after 9/11 as Muslims. Then my daughter experienced a Muslim ban. And she was young and she thought I would be deported. And I was like, no, sweetheart, I'm a citizen. No, mama, they're deporting people. She couldn't figure it out as a young kid. And she was made to feel other, completely other. That was a very, very hard kind of feeling to take your child to school and your child to say to you every day, Mama, I'm really scared that's going to happen to you. But I also remember, and this is something to talk about, is that there were lots of demonstrations in New York City against the Muslim ban, which, didn't pass. It was a 7-country ban. And there were more Jews demonstrating against this than even Muslims. And I cannot tell you how I felt with my daughter in New York City. And there were some Jews in those protests that said, we will wear the yellow star in protest against this. So why don't we have those memories of our relationship here in the United States, right? Why don't we remember the allyship of each other? Also, Muslims reaching out when their Jewish cemetery was defaced. So these are very important things. For example, in Riverdale, having all the windows of all the synagogues fixed by my center. I'm a Muslim, but the Jewish community felt like somebody was holding them. And this is what we need. We need to hold each other and come up with some solutions because, politicians honestly have totally failed. I mean, I knew that growing up as a child, and now it's just confirmed. It's a horrible thing. So I think that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is horrible. It affects our kids. It affects our future. It affects me in the workplace. You hear all kinds of things about Arabs and how Muslims act, and are we oppressed? Can I breathe at home? It's just this complete kind of monolithic feeling that Americans have about Islam and then also about Judaism, because those anti-Semitic tropes are still floating around in the United States that floated around before the Holocaust as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. On that point around, the politics of the day, I think that the language of politics has failed to build the necessary bridges in society to create a healthy society. It's simply too shallow of a language. Oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, pro-life and pro-choice, and it's just predictable. People screaming at each other, nobody listening. I think that our religions, and religious minorities in particular, can offer new language for how we bring values up to the surface, where we can actually engage in richer conversations together, rather than just scream at each other and fear there's going to be a whole revolt in society from one side or another. And I think that if all we do is double down on secular political discourse, I think America is not in a very unhealthy place. And I think that this current anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is in many ways connected to that problem. Just an empty, shallow discourse for how we talk about these ideas at large. And I agree in terms of the great problem of Islamophobia and going back, that Muslim ban was a terrifying time. It was a terrifying time. And I remember being very animated and feeling the Jewish community being very animated around that, given our history as refugees as well. And for Jews and our anti-Semitism, it's so funny, not long ago, I used to think it was so silly that Jews talked about anti-Semitism. Like when I was 10 years ago, I'm like, what are we doing? Like all these resources and conversation, let's just build forward. And I was so naive. I had no clue what was under the surface, and that was emerging. And how it works, that whatever has been most hated in society, the Jew has often been blamed for as the minority. When the worst thing you could do is kill Jesus, then the Jews were unfairly blamed for doing that. When the worst thing to be was the founder of communism, the Jews were blamed for being the founders. And worst thing you could do is be a capitalist, then Jews were blamed for being the capitalists. If you were the race polluter, then that's the worst thing you could do. Then, according to the Nazis, the Jews were guilty. Turns out today, the worst thing you could be is a colonialist. And it happens to be that now the Jews are blamed for being the worst of all colonialists, guilty of apartheid and genocide. And so that's, to me, is just another form of anti-Semitism that we see today, where the Jew is held up disproportionately against any other group as the one responsible for whatever's worst in society. And I think that that it will be hard for Israelis and for Muslims in surrounding countries anytime soon given that they're the majorities in their countries, to embrace a certain type of connection. We pre-October 7th, we did see some of that happening in really powerful ways. But I think in America, as religious minorities here, where Jews are minorities and Muslims are minorities, we can create a model together that can have a ripple effect into the Middle East.
Thank you, Rabbi. And this next question will likely be the last, as we have a hard stop at 4:50 Pacific or 7:50 Eastern, wherever you are. So go for the last question, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. Given all the tensions around the Israel-Gaza war, how might we rebuild bridges between American Jewish and American Muslim communities?
I think there are very few that are still building these bridges. I know a few in New York. But I think that you have to deal with real truths. And I think that's the hardest thing to do is you can have this conversation if you don't believe in the existence of Israel and you don't believe that Palestinians should have a state. You just cannot have this conversation. And I think that, I know that's a political statement, but I just have so much experience with this, that is the most important thing. And I don't know if people are ready to even do that here in the United States, meaning the Jewish or Muslim community. So I think, how to build bridges is to sort of listen. And, Buddhism is really good at that. It's taught me how to think about listening actively, and to listen to the pain, but also the perspective. Because I'll tell you, this violence is not going to go away. And Isaac, you're younger than all of us. You're going to have to deal with this. And I don't want you to deal with this. I don't want my kids to deal with this. But it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle. And we're creating this memory. And how we create these memories of this moment and give it off to our kids is really, really crucial. Whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Palestine, Palestinian territories, Gaza, West Bank, or the United States. We as a community, right, we identify Jewish or Muslim, right, are building memories, but what kind of memories do we want to build, even if they're painful? Do we want to move away from this generation and give off the memory of hate or peace or understanding or education or spiritual direction? And those are decisions that we as community builders have to make. I can't ask anyone to come to the table, but I can be here for those that want to come in to the table. And that's all I can do.
Yeah, I'm at the point where I appreciate what we said about age, where I really think more and more just about the country my kids will live in and my grandkids will live in. And just worry. And yes, the lower level here is that we can unite around self-interest and reciprocity. We can basically say, look, we're both religious minorities. We're in this together. Let's support each other out of reciprocity because, white nationalists and, other groups that are afraid and hateful towards minorities are a threat. And unite in that way. But that's not going to be strong enough. I think we need to think not just about the surviving question, but the thriving question of what we can do together. And I don't think we can do so much during this war. I don't think we can do so much because it's just so raw, and it can be hard for some to totally get it. I mean, most Jews I know have some relative who is serving in the army. And that they're up at night with, there's a sense of an existential threat. When missiles are coming from Iran or from wherever, there's a sense of, is this going to be a second Holocaust? Like, are we actually going to make it out of that? And I used to think language was like that, was totally alarmist, but the fears are very high. And of course, Palestinians living in Gaza The fears are enormous, for their survival, and anyone who's related to them or has deep friends or roots there, or people in Lebanon who are innocent people caught in this war. And so rebuilding is going to be really hard. It's going to have to happen at the right time, these relationships. But I do hope that we can do it not on political grounds, but on religious grounds. Because I think that look, a week away from election, we're all thinking about political revolution, but I think we need a spiritual revolution much more. So the deepening of empathy, the deepening of understanding, of bridge building, of seeing each other, more than just talk of one state and two state and the solutions. We need to figure out how to actually see each other and talk to each other and care about each other.
Thanks, Rabbi Shmuly. We have a first question from the audience. Why are there so few Muslim voices condemning Hamas, Hezbollah, etc.? I don't know of a single Muslim rally after October 7th protesting Hamas or calling for the return of the hostages. Moreover, why is the Muslim world so plagued by extreme Islamism? Boko Haram, Taliban, Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, etc. It doesn't seem that a critical mass of Muslims are standing up to Islamism. As a derivative, why are Muslims obsessing with Israel and Gaza rather than the plight of millions of Muslims in the Sudan, China, Myanmar, and Nigeria, and more?
Wow. So let me say something. Like, I remember after 9/11, people asked that question. Why didn't Muslims stand up or speak out? And I remember really well, I wasn't living in New York then. I was in Los Angeles. And we did the Islamic Council of Southern California, and we all wrote a statement. We contacted all these news stations, and nobody would take it. We wrote statements. We did all kinds of things. We condemned October 7th. And even the Council of American Islamic Relations condemned October 7th. The Islamic Society of North America, ISNA, the biggest one, condemned October 7th. Now, why are they obsessed with, say, what's going on in Gaza? It's a very long conversation, but I could just tell it to you in a short way, is that colonialism is still very fresh in the minds of most Muslims and Arabs, Asians, and Africans. And Israel was seen and perceived as a colonial state by many countries in what we call the Middle East today, including Asia and Africa. There was a woundedness about Muslims at that time. And they felt like a state came in that they saw as European, okay, not Jewish necessarily, but European, because a lot of Europeans migrated to Israel. So I think there's that connection of rejecting that Western imperialism away from the world of Islam. That's one concrete way that is perceived. And the third is I'm still working on Sudan and Somalia and the Uyghurs and Muslim minority rights in India. And, I just was in Sarajevo working on problems that are going on the border there in Bosnia. So there are people who are aware, but some Muslims don't even know what's going on in Somalia or Sudan, right? Sudan is the worst humanitarian crisis today. And in 2005, there was a genocide, which is now has come back again, where, of course, the victims are, again, women and children. So Islam is Muslim countries are going through a lot. Why don't Muslims stand up against this extremism? We do. But when you have the government that's corrupt and you have this extremism, hand in hand with it, it's very hard to stand up without getting killed, imprisoned. I'll give you example of Afghanistan, Iran. Pakistan has its own trouble, but I think it's actually way kind of contained in a way than most places. But that's not an easy question, because I am infuriated by what's going on in Sudan and Somalia and other places in the world. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much for the answer, Dr.
Isaac, just to conclude my own thought here, and if Dr. Afridi wants to offer closing remarks, I know we're at time here. I just want to say how much this is a breath of fresh air, because these are such loaded issues, and so heavy and so hurtful and sad and angry and infuriating, and there's so many emotions, and there's so few spaces we can actually talk with respect and partnership and solidarity to say, like, look, we're all hurting here and confused, and this is so tense, but let's just try to figure this out together. How we're going to combat genocide in the world, and how we're going to foster peace and understanding in the world. And I'm just so grateful to Dr. Afridi for her work and her partnership, and willing to sit in these uncomfortable spaces together. And I'm grateful to all who joined here, that we can continue to foster more tolerance and pluralism and stand up for what we think is just and right, and do it in a way that brings more light than heat and brings our communities together.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Isaac, and also that look, next week we're gonna find out about well, I don't know if we'll find out about the elections, but I want to say it's really hard for me right now. Very, very hard. And look, I have to walk the line of peace. That's the only thing I got. And I don't mean like kumbaya, but I mean conversation, dialogue, understanding, education, challenge. It's very easy for me to, shut off all my Jewish colleagues and friends and organizations and sit at home. But we have to be there for each other on a human level. And that's really where I'm at on this. And so thank you for the opportunity, Rabbi.
Thank you, Dr. Afridi. Thank you, Rabbi Dr. Shmuly. And that concludes this event. Thank you to everybody who came. Recordings of this will be up on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And thank you all. Have a fantastic night.
Thank you. Salam.